All right, January 6th, Tuesday, we're starting a new series where each and every Tuesday after we release in the morning, I'll be going through a quick overview of some of the features that we launched and some of the thinking behind what we're doing, as well as some of the mechanics as to how it specifically is done. In this particular instance, we did really three things in this release this morning. So the first of which is we introduced a waitlist to collect interest for a beta that we'll eventually invite users to. The second of which is we added basic authentication through an email. We have some plans to add in some OAuth stuff in the future. We're just really starting simple here. As you can tell through, what we're talking about, plus, the product itself, we're still pretty early here. So you're going to be able to sort of see a whole bunch of stuff get built each and every week. If you're interested, feel free to subscribe, of course. And the last is looking at end-to-end testing. So a lot of what we're building here is done through AI coding agents, specifically Claude Code. And in doing that, we want to be able to guide, the agentic coding agent. And to do this, we're relying a lot on end-to-end tests so that the agent themselves can actually understand what the outcome needs to look like and then can iterate and loop until that outcome is met. And so those are the three big features. So you're taking a look at one of those. In fact, right here, this is the landing page that we have. You can see this if you want to on your own. You can go to Volio.ai. This is a product which is a companion tool for professionals to collect a bunch of experiences in their workplace or sort of their job. And when they go in and add all that content to this particular product, it is all analyzed and then insights are drawn from it. So that it's a low friction way to get, information in to a product, but then an AI is going to actually detect a bunch of interesting things that, about the content that the user is adding. So specifically, what skills they might be demonstrating, what people they're interacting with, what tools they're using, things like that. All that stuff is done in an automated way. So we're, again, pretty early in terms of introducing this product. We've got a landing page. You can get in and take a look at it. We added this waitlist here. The waitlist itself, just to sort of, level set to start, right? Like in essence, what we're doing here is we're starting to collect email addresses such that we can market to those folks in the future or at least promote our product. And when you get to that place, you more or less are starting to talk about the idea of marketing emails, which contrast with emails that are transactional in nature. Transactional in nature, really meaning that they are, the native email notifications that occur through your product such that the product itself can perform its function. So think, a password reset or something like that, right? Like you need to have that email actually hit an inbox in order for whomever that person is that's trying to use that product to actually use it. That differs from things like email campaigns that are more promotional in nature. So those two types of emails are handled differently. For example, when you send a marketing email, you need to be able to unsubscribe from that list, right? That's part of, the sort of legal environment here in the US and in other places, of course, too. But nonetheless, that's an example of how they need to be treated differently. And so in this instance, I took a look at a variety of different providers. I had really one or two sort of unique factors that played into my decision making, but predominantly speaking, is one, needs to be a tool that is going to be well suited for email or marketing emails. Two, we're trying to do things on sort of the more affordable side of the house, right? So if they have an affordable starter tier or a free tier, that's part of the mix. And then lastly is that as a part of the first factor, really, I want to be able to send emails in workflows. So as an example, this isn't happening for the waitlist as is right now, but when we get to having new users join the service, I want to be able to send them emails at, day 0, day 1, day 3, day 7, and maybe even also based upon what they're doing inside of the actual software, right? So I want to have a product that's capable of doing that. Those are generally more promotional in nature too, by the way, right? Like those are not necessarily, part of the system level notifications that need to be going out. That's more of like a product update or a, newsletter-y sort of style message that we're sending. So those are going to be a little bit more in the marketing camp. So I want to have a tool that's capable of doing this. So Loops is, a tool that, is up against many of the other incumbents inside of the marketing email world, like the MailChimps, and the Constant Contacts and things like that are out there. Loops really fits the bill. It's simple, to the point, knocks and checks all the boxes that I'm after. I really was, looking at them relative to another provider, email provider called Resend. Resend is a little bit more specialized and capable in the transactional email space. It has, is at least known for anyway, a lot of the developer experience that it offers. And it, in fact, is what I will actually be using for transactional emails. But I chose consciously to actually, go with Loops for your marketing emails and then Resend for transactional emails, largely because of, some of the developer experience from the Resend point of view. They have a more built out transactional email system relative to Loops. So you sort of can't just sort of use a single system for both. You probably could find one of those. You can do that, but I think my needs are, I know them enough anyway right now where I want to use two separate vendors because I think those separate vendors are going to meet the needs differently. And Resend actually has this feature where you can actually have users email a address, and then that content that's inside of that email is actually going to be sort of captured by the product. So that's interesting for this product in the future. So that's another real interesting reason why I was after or interested in Resend for transactional emails, whereas, I'm going to go with Loops for the marketing emails. So really fast here, the experience, let's take a look. And I'll just add my email address here. Let's say test and a bunch of digits. Let's go ahead. And this is going to more or less do an API call over to Loops, add me to a list or an audience as it's known inside of Loops. And then it will also send off an email, which more or less looks like this. It's a pretty simple introductory email that sort of introduces myself and sort of asks a couple questions about, what their interest is about for Volio or for the product. Loops is cool because it has a bunch of like templates inside of it, right? So like I didn't have to spend a ton of time thinking about like what should my, email content be. I just picked one of the templates up from Loops and then sort of changed it up a little bit. Poof, all good. So that's the first feature, a really quick and simple implementation of a waitlist. And then secondarily, the other is authentication. So you actually sort of can see that I was logged in there. But the way that we've set this up is through Supabase Auth. So Supabase, known for its databases, is actually has a service for authentication as well. And so that's what we're using here. I will show you a little bit about how that's implemented. Let's actually go and do that right now. So test-beta. This is a really simple gate that I've put on the front of sign up so I don't have people randomly signing up when the product is not fully baked quite yet. If they want to sign up, they have to put their name into the waitlist. And then once I have the product built out well enough, I can send them a code. They can enter this code here. And, when they do, this will validate that it's the right code, and then they're going to be able to sign up. So again, it's my way of being able to release this stuff out to the public without me feeling like somebody's going to sign up and sort of see an underwhelming product experience. They're going to need to sign up for the waitlist, and then ultimately, I can sort of choose who I'm going to invite when and have more control over that. So, what you're looking at here is me. I will go and do a test here. This is all locally right now. This all works, out in production as well, but this is a little bit of a simple way for me to do this. I'm going to go and enter in a password. This works. This is all implemented with Supabase Auth for sign up. So creating new user accounts, for logging in, no shocker. And then other things like resetting passwords. And so all that stuff is handled by Supabase Auth. And you're going to see here, it's now going to prompt me for an email or to go to my email. I have Mailpit set up here on local to simulate what it's going to look like for users who are using or who are going to get an email from Supabase. Or in this case, what I've had happen is I have Supabase actually managing and maintaining all the users, but Supabase by default does offer some email confirmations out of the box. I've chosen to actually use Resend, like I was mentioning earlier, in combination with a tool that they offer, which is called React Email, which allows you to use React inside of email templates. So I've wired up a webhook for Supabase to connect to when Supabase receives these or has these moments, right, when it's going to need to do something and an email needs to be sent. So when I put over a request to Supabase to create a new user and send across all the things that I just sort of showed, that happens. The actual user's created. Let's go over here. Right, that new user has been created. I have some seeded, data in here and some past, things, some past tests. But that user has been created. Let's go over here, and it's waiting for verification. So it's waiting for us to click on that link. And what's happened then is that Supabase then sent an event back to that webhook, which then my React email and resend functionality then sort of took over and sort of routed that request through my own transactional email system. And so here is a look at this is React email. This is an open source project. You can just go off and take a look at it. It's actually built by the folks that do resend. So they're sort of associated to one another. Here's resend themselves. Take a look at these guys. I think they're doing pretty interesting stuff. And here's a look at some of the emails that I have set up. And you obviously can see one of those that's happening here in action. But I also have, an email change, email confirmation, password reset. Again, some of those emails that are going to be tied to, authentication overall. And so in this instance, I have Mailpit hooked up to simulate this stuff locally. This would happen through Resend specifically once it hits production. So I have a way to manage, how many emails I'm sending through Resend, because when you do send test emails, they have, some ability to manage for test emails inside of Resend, but all those hit your quota, which you have only so many of inside of a month. And I'm doing end-to-end testing a whole lot. So when I say a lot, I mean Claude Code is doing this multiple times each and every hour, as it's going and validating different things that it's building. So I didn't want to have it hit the actual quota that I would otherwise be using for production. So I have a little bit of a test set up for pre-production environments. But once that email is then clicked, here we're sent into a pretty minimalist homepage. This is all not dynamic. This is coming soon. Again, a reason why I want to be able to gate folks from being able to sign up quite yet. But then if we were to go back over to Supabase, of course, now we do have that particular user as being verified. Now they've logged in. Cool. Now they're in. And now, when they go to, let me remind myself what the email address was, but now login should work just the same. So again, set up with Supabase Auth. Supabase I will be using for the database itself, the application database. I am not quite there. Still pretty early in all of this. That's going to come in a future Tuesday update. But that's a little look at Supabase Auth and implementation of that, as well as some of the transactional system that we're using through Resend and React Email. And lastly is end-to-end testing. Testing, as I would imagine some of you or many of you already know, super important or super powerful anyway when it comes to using some of the agentic coding tools. The reason being is that, these agentic coding tools are really searching or really value or are way more effective, you might just sort of say, when they understand what the end result needs to be. So as an example, if you have a mockup, right, that you've built and designed, that's an example of like the expected result. So that's really great for instances where you're using agentic coding tools, because the agentic coding tool can just continuously sort of, iterate on whatever they're building such that it can match the mockup. So the more that you can do of that, the better. So the same is sort of true in terms of like the underlying functionality. And the way that you can do that, again, maybe no shocker to many of you, right, is to build tests through, and many of you probably have done this plenty of times in the past with test-driven development, where the more tests that you're adding up front, and then you sort of go off and build whatever you're building, and you ultimately sort of go from 0 tests passing to maybe 10 tests or 100% of tests passing. That's the way you're done. It's the same is true inside of agentic coding. So I'm using Playwright to do end-to-end testing. I'm leaning on it pretty heavily. And so like, just to give you a little bit of a look at that, let's just go into, I'm already in there, and run test end-to-end. And while that's running, we will take a look at this. So you can see I've got a bunch of tests. So I've got a bunch for beta access, for sign up, for login, for password reset, some of the protected routes, session management style stuff. I have just to sort of show you a little bit about how this is done. I won't go too deep into this. I have a Claude rules file that helps me outline how I want different end-to-end tests to be built. So this targets any file updates that are inside of the tests directory. And then I've got a bunch of details here about that, about what I want them to look like, using sort of best practices or unique, preferences that I might particularly have. Things like that we're doing here are talking about what our naming conventions are going to be, how they're structured, focus, things like that. That guides Claude Code to build these and organize these in, the way that I want them to be built. So as an example, one of the things that we've, done here is, let's go off to sign up. I think sign up's going to be a better one. Oops, let's roll that up, sign up. And then One of the things that we're using here is the page object model. So let's bring up that here. So this is one of the conventions that I have set out inside of the Playwright Claude rules file. So I wanted to use the page object model so that the tests themselves are not littered with like 40 different ways to do the same thing, like click a button. So all that stuff is centralized in the page object model, which then can be reused across any of the test suites. So small little example of how I have these set up. And I'm leaning on them again pretty heavily. You can see that I have like something like 25. I've got one skipped here that I just need to probably actually delete, but nonetheless, the experience with Playwright has been really good. I think, again, if there was a couple tips that I would offer, it would really be to get the conventions dialed, because, if you let Claude Code just sort of run on tests without guidance, you're going to have, a little bit of spaghetti. In the same way you might with any other feature or any other code that you might be writing, the more that you're going to have conventions for this, either in your Claude.md or inside of a subagent or inside of a rules file. I'm just doing it inside of a rules file. I actually am in the future going to be doing more with a end-to-end test engineer who is going to be a little bit more equipped for just that responsibility. More to come here, but I'm really doing this through the testing conventions. In fact, I have the test engineer taking a look at that critical rules. Go and take a look at that rules file. But this has been super helpful. Would very much recommend it. It is really such a time saver, because you otherwise are going to be testing these things one by one, and that can, be a large draw on time. And so, the more you can add tests, the more you can have Claude Code write the tests, and the more you can have Claude Code write the tests and then have those tests pass as you develop new features, the better off you'll be. So again, just a little bit of an intro to some of the things that we released this week. We'll have more for you next week. If you're interested in, learning a little bit more about what we're doing week over week, or generally other things, feel free to subscribe, or, drop a comment. Let me know what you liked. Let me know what you didn't like, in the video, and we'll see you next week.